Touchdown, buzzer beater, do it all now. All now, top corner talking home run. Touchdown, buzzer beater, do it all now. All now, top corner like ooh.
All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Monday, March 10th, 2025. This is the Monday Report. I'm your host, H. James K. On today's episode, we are going to be previewing NFL free agency. We're going to go through all the really big name free agents. We're going to explain how free agency works. Then we're going to talk about all of the division winners from the 2024 season. We're going to go through all of their big free agency needs. Then I'm going to make some predictions and we're going to wrap this thing up. To start us off, it's probably wise to explain for those who don't know exactly how NFL free agency works. NFL free agency is simply when the new league year begins. Every league year begins in March. This year it begins on Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. When that happens, all contracts where a player was on the last year of their contract, that contract is now done. It's finished. At which point they can begin negotiating with other teams. They are allowed to negotiate with their own team ahead of the new league year, but teams and players cannot talk to those outside of their specific organization until the new league year begins. New contracts can be signed, and trades can take place. Trades. We've seen a couple of them already in the week or so leading up to NFL free agency. But now, once free agency really begins, you're going to start seeing things really happen really, really fast. Before we can talk about the various needs of all the different teams, there have been some big moves that have already taken place so far in the last 10 days. First of all, the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins was franchise tagged by the Bengals. T. Higgins is a big-bodied, possession-style receiver who is the second receiver, or receiver 1.5, if you will, to his teammate Ja'Marr Chase, who is a really fast burner-type receiver who really makes a lot of splashy plays. The Bengals have had both T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase for years, since they drafted both of them. And the problem they're now facing is it's time to pay both of those guys. And as they're learning, wide receivers want a lot of money these days. And money doesn't grow on trees. So now, the Bengals have some choices to make. This year, they've chosen to franchise tag T. Higgins. The franchise tag is a special thing teams can do where they basically say, we're going to pay you X amount of money commensurate with your value in what your previous contract was, and you're going to play with us for the next year. They can then do it a second time after that for the following season, but the pay is significantly more, which is a punitive way of saying, shit or get off the pot. Sign him or let him go experience free agency. Either way, the Bengals have locked up T. Higgins for at least one more year. Along those same lines, the San Francisco 49ers have traded wide receiver Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders. Deebo Samuel is another receiver 1.5, receiver 1A and 1B kind of situation where he's another really talented playmaking wide receiver on a team that has another one named Brandon Aiyuk. Now, Brandon Aiyuk is the really big star on the Niners, so Deebo Samuel has been kind of playing second fiddle, but he wants to get paid, but the Niners don't exactly want to pay him as much as he's probably worth, considering he could be a number one receiver in another team. So, a couple of days ago, the 49ers traded Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders, who finished second in the NFC East last year and lost the NFC Championship game to their division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles. Deebo Samuel being on the Washington Commanders is going to be big. He's a really talented wide receiver. It gives rookie quarterback Jayden Daniels, a really big, fast, talented wide receiver, to pair with Terry McLaurin, or Scary Terry, as many call him. That trio of Terry McLaurin and Jayden Daniels and Deebo Samuel is going to be really, really good next year, and it could be a very momentous trade where the hierarchy in the NFC is concerned. In the AFC, the Las Vegas Raiders have re-signed Max Crosby, their star defensive end from Eastern Michigan University. They had made him the highest paid non-quarterback in history when he was making $35 million a year every year for the next 3 years. That record lasted 4 days, which we'll get to later. Crosby, as I mentioned, went to Eastern Michigan. He's from the Michigan area, and he is an absolute animal. He's a beast, a game wrecker, a really, really talented defensive end. So, for the Raiders to lock him up, along with all the other free agent moves they're making so far, it's encouraging for the Las Vegas Raiders. Back in the NFC North, the Chicago Bears have traded for a pair of offensive linemen. To start, they traded for former Detroit Lion, former Los Angeles Ram Jonah Jackson, who often plays right guard. On top of the Jonah Jackson trade, they also traded for all-pro, all-world tackle guard hybrid Joe Thuney. Joe Thuney has done nothing but block for Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. He was the guard for Tom Brady back in his Patriot days. Then he was with him in Tampa Bay, and then he's been with him recently with Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. But Kansas City has been looking to get younger on the offensive line, and they've now traded them to the Chicago Bears. So these two signings should do a ton to help the Chicago Bears offensive line. The Chicago Bears are known for awful O-line play. With the Bears deciding to make these trades, it really shows that they are committed to building this team under Ben Johnson the right way, in the trenches from the inside out, as opposed to just surrounding their quarterback with a whole bunch of wide receivers and hoping that the terrible offensive line won't be that big of an issue. This is all to say, look for the Bears to be a major factor in the NFC in 2025. Next, Geno Smith, who played quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, has been traded to the Las Vegas Raiders. The Seahawks have had Geno Smith for a couple of years now as kind of a bridge quarterback. He's played very, very well for them, but the Seahawks have just come up short. As for the Raiders, they've been in quarterback hell for the last 4 or 5 years. They just really haven't had solid quarterback play. So this move should do a lot to help new coach Pete Carroll get the Raiders out of the quarterback wilderness, as it is often said. In arguably the most shocking development, the Cleveland Browns have extended star defensive end Myles Garrett with a 4-year, $204 million deal, which will pay Myles Garrett $40 million in average annual value. Average annual value, or AAV, as I'll probably be calling it for the rest of this episode, is the total dollar amount the player is going to be making between the roster bonus, signing bonus, and the specific guaranteed money that they're absolutely going to make. It's the total cumulative amount. So, with Myles Garrett now making $40 million AAV, he's now the highest paid non-quarterback ever in the history of football, breaking Max Crosby record from 5 days ago. So, this was very sudden because for the last week, the Cleveland Browns have been in this kind of death match with Myles Garrett where he announced that he wanted a trade at the NFL Combine last weekend, and the Browns just weren't hearing it. They weren't listening. They didn't care. And I guess the solution was to throw several dump trucks worth of money at Myles Garrett, hoping that he'll stay. Now, whether he'll be super motivated by that $40 million remains to be seen, but for the time being, the Cleveland Browns have added another gigantic contract to their salary cap. It'll be interesting to see how this contract affects the defensive end / edge market in free agency going forward, because there are other players like Aiden Hutchinson coming up for contract in a couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see how much he's going to command going forward, and if $40 million becomes the starting point, or if people will look at this number as that's a unicorn number, it's the Browns being stupid, much like they were with the Deshaun Watson deal where they gave a washed-up quarterback, a fully guaranteed $230-something million contract, the first of its kind in the history of the NFL. Anyway, it'll be very interesting to see how this affects the Cleveland Browns going forward. When many thought that they could trade Myles Garrett for a whole truckload of picks, get a big contract off of their salary cap, and build for the future. Instead, they're aiming to keep their star in Cleveland. Lastly, star wide receiver DK Metcalf was traded to the Steelers and then extended on a 5-year deal paying him $30 million average annual value. DK Metcalf played for the Seattle Seahawks. He's a huge 6'4", big-bodied wide receiver who can really bully a defense. He's super explosive. He's been a long ball artist for years. But last week he announced that he wanted a trade, and the Seattle Seahawks encouraged him to seek out said trade, and on Sunday they traded him. So it'll be interesting to see what the Steelers do with DK Metcalf, considering they're kind of in quarterback purgatory at the moment, but maybe this is them trying to sweeten the pot to attract another quarterback, which we'll get to later. As it stands at the time of this recording, those are the really big free agent moves that we've seen right now. So now it's time to move on to the actual free agent players who are available right now, the big stars. I'm going to go through a lot of players from several positions, starting with the quarterbacks. So the hottest name on the quarterback market in 2025 is Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold played for the USC Trojans in college, and when he got to the NFL, he was not super spectacular. Sam Darnold has had exactly one great season in his entire career, which was the 2024 season with the Minnesota Vikings. Before then, he was regarded as a subpar, mediocre quarterback who probably should be a backup. In Minnesota, Sam Darnold turned into a bona fide stud, leading the Minnesota Vikings to a 15-2 record and a playoff berth, but a first-round playoff exit. The problem with Sam Darnold is he has a tendency to not handle pressure from a defense well. In actuality, he turtles. He crumbles. It's like he sees ghosts out on the field. He starts sensing pressure if there is none. He misses pressure because he's not focused. He gets sacked a lot. He makes mistakes, and it all just kind of snowballs. So if he's kept clean, he's a pretty solid quarterback. But if he's not, he's a very mediocre quarterback. Honestly, when it comes to his landing spots, with the DK Metcalf trade, my gut tells me that the Steelers are probably the best landing spot for him, but I would not be surprised if the Seattle Seahawks make a run at him in an effort to replace Geno Smith. I would not be surprised in the least if the Vikings made a run at him to try to sign him to a 3-year deal paying out maybe $35 to $45-ish million a year. Kind of a low-level starting quarterback kind of contract as a bridge while they develop rookie J.J. McCarthy. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, but he is most definitely the top free agent in the market right now. Other quarterbacks to look out for is the future first-ballot Hall of Famer Aaron Rodgers. The former Packer and former Jet has now decided to part ways with the Jets after his contract. They've decided to go a separate way, so he's going to be on the market. He's a multi-time MVP. He's a Super Bowl winner. He's a legend. He is going to the Hall of Fame. But, Aaron Rodgers is a locker room cancer. He's a prima donna, diva, whatever you want to call him. He attracts a lot of media attention. He has a tendency to call out players in the press. He's not really a team player. Like, he didn't show up to a lot of practices and camps during the summers with the Jets. So whoever gets him is going to be signing him knowing that he's probably not going to be super great for the locker room. And at his age, he's not what he once was. Now, if this was the Aaron Rodgers of like 2015, then everyone, you pay him as whatever he wants for however long he wants. He's a crazy star. But now he's a good quarterback, but I don't believe for a second that Aaron Rodgers is a guy who can elevate a team and turn them into something that they are not designed to be. We've seen this before with quarterbacks leaving one place where they've been for a long time and going to another place and just totally floundering. It'll be interesting to see where Rodgers goes. Truthfully, I think it's going to come down to the New York Giants or some other quarterback needy team that is willing to take the risk on the circus that is the Aaron Rodgers experience. Now, the really funny one, though, would be if he was signed by the Minnesota Vikings, because then that duplicates the Brett Favre, Packers, Jets, Vikings arc again, which would be really funny. We could make fun of Vikings fans for that. And rest assured, if he does sign with the Vikings, that's exactly what I'll be doing. At the running back position, there aren't many great names. Like, there's no Saquon Barkley this year. So this year, probably the biggest names would be Rico Dowdle, who plays for Dallas. I think Dallas is going to re-sign him and extend him, but that remains to be seen. Other than that, you have Pittsburgh Steelers running back Najee Harris, who's very experienced, who's very consistent, but he's not super explosive. He's been with the Steelers for a long time, so I think they'll re-sign him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he went somewhere else. Though, admittedly, he's not going to command a huge contract. None of these running backs are. Moving on to wide receivers, there are 4 I want to talk about. The first one, and arguably the biggest name left on the wide receiver market, is Stefon Diggs. The former Maryland Terrapin is a game-changing wide receiver. He's a huge playmaker. He was with the Vikings for a long time, and then he was traded to the Bills, and the Bills had him forever, and he was huge for the Bills. Then he was traded to he was traded to the Houston Texans for the 2024 season, where he sadly suffered a really bad knee injury, so he's now a free agent coming off of a serious knee injury, and it'll be interesting to see if he's lost a step, if he's still got that explosiveness that he had with Minnesota and the Buffalo Bills. Either way, someone is going to sign him and is going to pay him north of $30 million because Stefon Diggs is just that guy. So, other than Stefon Diggs, you've got Cooper Kupp. Now, technically Cooper Kupp is on contract with the Los Angeles Rams, but he's older and there's injury issues for Cooper Kupp. He can't stay healthy. He has not had a full season in several years now. And with his age, it looks like the Rams are going to want to get a little younger at the position. They've already made moves to that extent. So I would not be surprised if he is cut or traded when free agency begins. So look out for that. I don't know where he would go because everybody needs a wide receiver. You could almost pencil in your team for who would he be a best fit at. It's your team because Cooper Kupp is just that kind of wide receiver. So other than Cooper Kupp, you have Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is, in my opinion, a future Hall of Famer. He's super consistent. He's been there, done that. He is aging, but when he's healthy on the field, Keenan Allen is arguably the most consistent wide receiver in the league. He's an absolute animal. Lastly, but most certainly not least, you have Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is a fiend at getting third and long, third and short catches to really move the chains. He's injury prone, as are a lot of wide receivers these days, but Chris Godwin is really good when he's healthy. He suffered off and on with injuries with Tampa Bay in the last several years, but now he's a free agent. Maybe Tampa Bay brings him back, maybe they don't, but definitely look for Chris Godwin to be a factor on whatever team he is playing for. As it stands for the tight end position, this free agency, there's really not any big names. There's no like Gronk or Sam Laporta or Travis Kelce. There's no one like that. The only real name I can think of is Evan Ingram, who was cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars last week. He's an experienced tight end. He's been there. He's done that. He can block pretty well. He can catch okay. So, as for the tight ends, don't be surprised if you hear his name if you really pay attention to free agency. He's going to find a home on a team because Evan Ingram is he's the guy in the tight end space this offseason. So moving on from skill positions on the offense, we got to talk about the big men up front. On the offensive line topic, there aren't really many tackles in free agency this year. Going in last week, it was looking like Joe Thuney and Alaric Jackson and Ronnie Stanley were all going to be big players in free agency, but Alaric Jackson re-signed with the Rams, Ronnie Stanley re-signed with the Ravens, and the Chiefs traded Joe Thuney. So really, there aren't many good tackles on the market right now, and the saying goes, any good offensive lineman you could have is going to be found in the draft because no one lets a good offensive lineman walk in free agency. Everyone always locks down their good ones. So if you see an offensive lineman in free agency, it means the team doesn't want him anymore, which should tell you all you need to know. Either way, for the guard position, there are two really solid options at guard. There's Brandon Scherff, who's experienced, reliable, doesn't really suffer from injury. He's been around forever. And there's Kevin Zeitler. Kevin Zeitler played with the Bengals for several seasons and then last year signed with the Lions on a kind of one-year rental deal. And he was really good in the run game for the Lions, but his pass protection was just okay. Now they've let him walk in free agency, and it's looking like the Lions are going to be in the market for a new offensive lineman. He's really good run blocking, so do not be surprised if a team that likes to run the ball signs Kevin Zeitler. And assuming he stays healthy, I would not be surprised if he's a pretty damn good offensive guard for whoever signs him. Lastly, at center, you have another one who fits in the category of he's reliable and he's experienced, which is Ryan Kelly, who's been around forever. So it's not a sexy star power kind of year in the offensive line space, much like with tight ends. Now, the defensive line space is filled with names. Absolutely jam-packed with huge names and really big game-changing players who are all hitting free agency, who are all going to go some places and make noise. To that end, I've got 9 players I want to talk about on the defensive line, 6 edges, otherwise known as defensive ends or pass rushing outside linebackers. So 6 edges and 3 defensive tackles. So the big names you're going to see in the defensive line space in free agency this year are Za'Darius Smith, who was released by the Lions on Sunday. He's a good kind of second option pass rusher for a team, though the Lions traded for him to be their first option in lieu of Aiden Hutchinson after he broke his leg, but he wasn't super great at that. So if a team was to sign Za'Darius Smith, if they already have a really established pass rusher, he could be an excellent number 2 guy who doesn't have to deal with a lot of double teams. Beyond Za'Darius Smith, we have to talk about Trey Hendrickson. Now, Trey Hendrickson is technically under contract with the Cincinnati Bengals, but they have allowed him to seek out a trade, and the rumor is they would be looking for a low second rounder, high third rounder, which would be basically second round picks in the 25 and up range, and then a low third rounder. So do not be surprised if somebody trades for Trey Hendrickson. He was an excellent pass rusher the last 2 years, even though he played for a truly abysmal Bengals defense, and he led the league in sacks. Trey Hendrickson is an absolute beast, and I'm really, really, really hoping that my Lions will trade for him, even though I know they won't, because that's not how the Lions do things. But still, someone I think is going to trade for Trey Hendrickson, and they're going to get an absolute dog of a defensive lineman. Next, we've got to talk about Sheldon Rankins, who was the D tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2024. Now, he's been around a long time, and he's one of these kind of big space eater, take up blocks kind of D tackles in the middle of a defense. He's not flashy. He's been around a long time, but he's a solid option. So do not be surprised if someone signs him. Moving on, we've got to talk about Khalil Mack, who was an edge. He was drafted by the Bears years ago, and he was an absolute beast for them, and then they traded him to another team, and he's kind of bounced around the league for the last couple of years, and now he's a free agent again, and supposedly the Bears and Mac have a mutual interest in kind of seeing a reunion of sorts. So who knows where he's going to land, but whoever gets him, he's going to be a great second option rotational pass rusher. I don't think he can be the every down guy anymore, but if you use him as a rotational piece, he's going to be an absolute game wrecker just because of his intangibles, his athleticism. So moving back to the interior of the defensive line, we got defensive tackle Jonathan Allen, who has been around for years. He was recently cut by the Washington Commanders. He's been around, he's very consistent, and he's not super injury prone. He's one of those guys who you don't really talk about a lot because he doesn't make a lot of flashy plays, but he's a really consistent guy who's going to make a difference. So do not be surprised if a team desperate for interior D-line help, which that's Tampa, Houston, the Chiefs, that kind of thing. Don't be surprised if someone snatches him up in a heartbeat. So the next defensive lineman we got to talk about is edge Joey Bosa. The former Buckeye has been with the Chargers, who drafted him for years and years and years, but the punishing nature of the game and father time have kind of turned him into a injury-prone pseudo-star. He's good when he's healthy, but he's not healthy often, so the Chargers are looking for new blood at the position. It's looking like the Niners are very keen on reuniting him with his brother, who also played at Ohio State. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of what happens with him this year, considering he's in his 30s, he's been around a while, and who knows how many more good years he has left in the tank, really. So look out for him. Next, we got to talk about Javon Kinlaw. Javon Kinlaw is a D-tackle. He's another one of these kind of 3-4 style space eaters who's just kind of there to be a brick building in the middle of the defense. He's not super sexy, but I can really see a team like the Buccaneers signing him because they really do need D-line help, which we'll talk about later. So don't be surprised if someone picks him up. Next, we got to talk about edge Haason Reddick. Now, Haason Reddick is another one of these like sack artist kind of defensive ends, but the last 2 years of his career haven't been great. He's been playing with the Jets, and he didn't like it there, and he asked for a trade, and he traded, and it just hasn't gone well. Lastly, in the defensive line category, we have Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat has been a major player in the D-line space for a couple of years now. He was an absolute beast with the Washington Commanders back when they were the Washington Football Club. Then he was traded to the Bears in 2023, and he was okay with the Bears. I shouldn't say okay. He was a beast with the Bears, but it didn't make much difference because the Bears are inept. Either way, after the 2023 season, the Philadelphia Eagles decided to add him to their infinity gauntlet that they call a defensive line. They had tons of great players on that D-line, and he was one of them. So he's a really talented pass rusher. He's a kind of one of these game wreckers. He's hard to block. He's one of these guys who influences how an offense behaves. So he's going to get signed, and it's going to be quick. Like, I would not be surprised if when the new league year begins on Wednesday, if he is signed within the first hour, maybe. Hell, with the early tampering period being what it is, where teams are allowed to talk to other players outside of their organization but not sign anything legitimate until the new league year begins, I would not be surprised if a team already has a deal lined up for him, and we just haven't heard about it yet. So, Josh Sweat, beast, dog, he's definitely going to be a major player in a team next year. Moving on from the first line of defense, now it's time to talk about the linebackers, and I've got two linebackers. Both are outside linebackers. The first linebacker to really talk about is Preston Smith. Now, Preston Smith has been around a while. He played for years with the Minnesota Vikings. He's a great pass rusher. He's a real gotta watch out for him type. He's good in coverage. and he's just been really, really excellent for the Vikings, especially this last year with Brian Flores' defense. So he's going to be the first linebacker off the board. I would almost guarantee it. Other than him, we have Matthew Judon, who's an older linebacker. He's been around. He's a good veteran presence. But I still think he's got several more years left in the tank. And he's going to be another one of these guys that, for a team that just desperately needs a linebacker, such as like Tampa Bay, he'll get snatched up. He'll get signed, and he'll get a pretty okay contract. It won't be anything like $35 million a year, but he'll get a pretty sizable contract, anywhere between probably $8 million and $15 million, probably, if I had to guess. Moving on to defensive backs, it's interesting this year because we don't really have any big names like Xavier McKinney or anything like that. Like Jair Alexander could be a thing if the Packers cut him, but they haven't so far, and I don't know if they will. But other than Jair Alexander, you've got corner Carlton Davis, who played in the 2024 season with the Detroit Lions, and when he was healthy, he was pretty damn good in coverage, but, well, when he was healthy. Lions fans always kind of knew that was a one-year rental, so now he's back on the in the market, and he'll get signed up. He's a really good corner. He's great, and he was a good locker room guy, so he'll get signed. Another guy, it's so funny. When I heard this player was cut by the Eagles, my first thought was the song Baby Come Back, because it's Darius Slay. Darius Slay is a corner who was drafted by the Detroit Lions, and he was awesome with the Lions. We called him Big Play Slay, and we loved him. And then stupid Matt Patricia was our coach and didn't like him because Darius Slay talked up in the locker room, so he traded him. So when I heard that the Lions were going to need another corner and Darius Slay was available, my first thought was, baby, come back! But yeah, that's not going to happen. He's not going to get signed. I think the Eagles are probably just going to sign him to a new, cheaper contract for whatever years he still wants to play, because I think he's a viable starter, but he is older. He played for several years with the Lions before playing several years with the Eagles. Other than those corners, we also have to talk about strong safety Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is a very experienced guy, and I'm saying that a lot because a lot of these guys are older. There aren't really that many young, up-and-coming guys on the market that you would want to talk about as a superstar because they always get re-signed. So Justin Simmons is one of these really consistent, older, experienced safeties. And for a team that really needs help on the back end, or maybe they need to be a little more multiple, he'll be a good choice because he's a good tackler, he's pretty decent in coverage, and he's going to be cheaper than a much bigger deal kind of safety. So he'll be a really good safety to watch out for if you're paying attention to that kind of thing. So that'll wrap up my talk about all the different available players that are kind of needing to be highlighted. So now let's talk about teams. So we're going to go through all 8 divisions, all 8 division winners in the NFL, and we'll go through some of their needs and maybe some players to consider for those teams. So to start it with, we're going to start with the NFC and the NFC North. In 2024, the Detroit Lions won the NFC North again. Oh yeah, it was great. And the Lions were cursed by the injury bug / early bye week bug. And it was awful, and their defense was a revolving mash unit of players you've never heard of and injured starters coming back and going out. Either way, for the Lions in 2025, they desperately need defensive line help. Now, going into this year, the Lions could have had Zadarius Smith because they had him for at least another year, but they released him. So with him gone and a space available at that edge position opposite Aiden Hutchinson, it'll be interesting to see where they go. Like, do they sign someone big like Josh Sweat or trade for someone like Trey Hendrickson? Or do they do what they're most likely going to do, which is sign a depth piece that you've never heard of and then draft somebody in the second round? I wonder if I've seen this show before. The answer is yes, I have, the last 3 years. Either way, the Lions are probably not going to sign a big, huge, flashy free agent, but I would not be surprised if they brought in a lesser guy like maybe Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa on a cheaper deal if he was willing. So, on the offensive side of the ball, the Lions need help at guard. Now, technically speaking, they were pretty solid, but Graham Glasgow is getting older and he was not great in 2024, and now they've let go of Kevin Zeitler. So the Lions are going to definitely be in the market for another lineman. Now, maybe they sign Kevin Zeitler to a cheaper deal than the one they had him on. I doubt that, but we'll kind of see how that goes. Moving on to the NFC South, we got to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and maybe they got some questions at wide receiver because of Chris Godwin, but I'm going to focus more on their defense because their defense desperately needed pass rush. They need so much help on the D-line to get that kind of four-man pass rush that teams really love because it allows you to be so multiple in the back end. So Javon Kinlaw in the middle, Zadarius Smith on the outside, those kind of guys, Josh Sweat. The Bucs are definitely going to sign some people on the D-line because they would be absolutely insane not to. Now, they also have needs at linebacker, and I think it'd be kind of neat to see Preston Smith in Tampa Bay in that defensive scheme that they run. And I would be really intrigued to see what that would do to their pass rush, considering Preston Smith is such a good pass rusher for a linebacker. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for those. Moving on, the Philadelphia Eagles, they won the NFC East, and, well, that team is like the Death Star or Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. They don't really have that many defensive issues or offensive issues. Like, they've already re-signed linebacker Zach Bond. They've already re-signed and extended Saquon Barkley with a massive, huge, multi-million-dollar contract. Saquon Barkley is their running back. So really, the Eagles, it's more about getting depth. Like maybe they re-sign Slay. Maybe they give Carlton Davis a call. I don't really think there are that many holes on the Eagles defense, but you never know. Maybe they make some moves. Maybe they don't. They're the reigning Super Bowl champs, so it will be kind of interesting to watch what they do in this offseason. Now, lastly in the NFC, the Los Angeles Rams won the NFC West, and they've made a whole slew of moves before free agency actually began. There was talk that Matthew Stafford wanted out, so they managed to convince him to stay, and they've gotten him a little more money, and they've now re-signed him to a multi-year deal. So the aging future Hall of Famer is staying in Los Angeles for the time being. Arguably, the Rams' biggest need is probably wide receiver. They got a little old and injury prone at the position in 2024. Now, they've already made some moves to that extent. They've re-signed Tutu Atwell, who's one of their third or fourth option guys, and they've signed former superstar Devonta Adams to a multi-year deal for pretty sizable money. So those two moves kind of tell you that they see wide receiver as a big deal, but that doesn't solve the conundrum of Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp was the guy in Los Angeles for years, but as he's gotten older, the wide receiver, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's been missing a pretty sizable chunk of games in the last couple of years, and he's not as efficient as he used to be. And quite frankly, Puka Nacua can do everything that Cooper Kupp can do for a hell of a lot cheaper and with a hell of a lot fewer injuries. So it remains to be seen if they trade Cooper Kupp or if they just cut him, but I don't think he's going to be sticking around, and I wouldn't be surprised if they let him go and then drafted a rookie in late rounds just as depth. Okay, now it's time to move on to the AFC, and in the AFC North, the division was won by the Baltimore Ravens, quarterbacked by Lamar Jackson. Going into this period, there were question marks about their O-line, but they managed to extend Ronnie Stanley, which was a really big deal for the Ravens. And with Ronnie Stanley now extended, the only real question mark is at guard on their O-line because they did have issues with pass rush on the left side. So maybe they sign a new left guard, maybe they just draft one, maybe they just run it back with what they got and hope things get better. But Ronnie Stanley signing a $60 million deal with $44 million guaranteed over several years, he ain't going anywhere. So the only real question they have left is at guard. Now, really, the Baltimore Ravens, they need help at safety. They need to be a little more multiple in coverage so that they can run more exotic looks in their 4-2-5 amoeba defense that half the league runs, and the Michigan Wolverines run, and the USC Trojans run, and several other teams at all levels now run since it was popularized. Justin Simmons, I think, is the guy to look for there, just because he's kind of a good all-rounder who I think could give them a really good edge. Moving on to the AFC South, the Houston Texans. When looking at their team, they need all of the offensive linemen. It's like the question is, do you need interior O linemen? And the answer is yes. Big bold letters, neon signs, fireworks if you have to. They need interior offensive linemen, both guard and center, because what happened to CJ Stroud in 2024 cannot be allowed to happen because it will stunt his growth and it will prevent the Houston Texans from making any noise in the postseason. I like Kevin Zeitler for this team just because I think he'd be really good at kind of run blocking and giving CJ Stroud more of a run option with the running backs and allow Houston to take a little bit off of the young quarterback's plate now that he's going into his third year and people expect more of him. I think actually expecting less of him and running the ball more might actually help his growth as it allows him to focus more on the game and less on dealing with the pass rush. So the Texans actually just recently traded with the Jaguars, the Jacksonville Jaguars, for wide receiver Christian Kirk to bolster their wide receiver position. In 2024, they came into the year with Stephon Diggs, but he had an injury and they just kind of went without, and this position was rather weak. So the Christian Kirk trade really kind of bolsters that. So it'll be interesting to see what the Texans do. Now, maybe they don't touch offensive line in the free agency at all, and they just draft a couple of guys. Who knows? But that is definitely the desperate need of the Houston Texans. In the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills were the winner in 2024, same as they have been for the last several years. Josh Allen won MVP, and the team was pretty damn solid considering everyone thought they would take a pretty serious step back. But as I've read from various Bills fans and Bills pundits, cornerback is a pretty serious need for them. Going into 2025, they had issues at the position in 2024, and I like Carlton Davis for this spot. I think he would do really well in their scheme, and I would love to see how he could react with that defense, with the personnel they have. So cornerback is the one for the Bills. Lastly, we got to talk about the evil Satan themselves, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs looked decidedly mortal in the Super Bowl as they got bludgeoned and brutalized and every other word you can think of to describe that performance. Much like the Eagles, there aren't many holes in the Chiefs roster. Now, one serious hole I think is offensive coordinator, but that's beside the point. From a purely personnel standpoint, they need help at both offensive tackle, right tackle and left tackle. Their tackles were turnstiles in 2024, and they were able to mask those issues during the regular season, but in the playoffs, that became an obvious issue. And if Patrick Mahomes is going to survive as he gets older, they're going to need to do something about that. Now, trading guard Joe Thuney, who can also play tackle, trading him away when he's a really great offensive lineman and was happy there, that was a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see if it works out for him. But with that having now taken place, it leaves massive holes on the O-line for the Chiefs. Now, admittedly, they didn't re-sign him. They gave guard Trey Smith a franchise tag, and there is talk that they want to extend him this offseason. So they've locked up at least one guard position, but both tackles and at least one guard, they probably need all of that. I don't know who I would really like for the Chiefs because they run such a different scheme with it being Andy Reid's scheme, and I admittedly don't know a ton about Andy Reid's offense, but they will definitely be signing somebody for at least one of those positions. If not, and probably they're going to spend draft capital on it too. So that is definitely the issue with the Chiefs. All right, next up, now that we've talked about all the different teams, I'm going to make some predictions for free agency. Now, it's admittedly very difficult to predict where players are going to go because there's so many teams and players, and it's all so complicated. But I think Sam Darnold is going to sign with a team other than Minnesota for an average annual value north of $55 million, which would make him one of the highest paid players in the league. Now, whether that's a smart decision is beside the point. I think someone is going to make that call with Sam Darnold. Next, I think Stefon Diggs will sign with a team with a contract worth north of $30 million annually. Now, that's going to be a team that I don't think people are really going to see coming, whether that's like the Patriots or someone with a quarterback already established and cap space. But he's definitely going to go to a place that's going to pay him that money because he feels he's worth that money. I would argue he's worth a pretty decent paycheck because he's a damn good wide receiver. So he's going to sign with a team for a massive contract worth north of $30 million, which would immediately make him one of the highest paid wide receivers ever of all time. Now, what's funny enough is when I was writing out this script, which took me a week of constantly modifying it because things are constantly changing in this damn NFL free agency shit, I predicted that DK Metcalf will be traded to a surprise team that nobody is talking about that's not the Patriots. And I totally called it because just 30 minutes before I sat down to record this, he got traded to the Steelers. I felt both devastated that I couldn't make that call ahead of time and hilariously vindicated because I totally called that. I totally knew it. It wasn't going to be the Patriots. I knew it wasn't going to be the Patriots. I'm a genius. Okay, I'm not a genius, but still, it made me chuckle. Next, I think Kansas City is going to do absolutely nothing to address tackle. And I think they're just going to look to the draft. That's my big prediction. I don't really think there's any tackles worth spending serious money towards that are really going to help them. And I don't think they're going to trade for a Ronnie Stanley who just signed a big contract or a Alaric Jackson who signed for a new contract. So I think the Chiefs are not going to do anything. I think they're just going to say, we got this, and then go to the draft. And lastly, there will be a blockbuster trade that nobody sees coming. Two teams that are not on the radar and a star that nobody thought was on the trading block. Something big out of nowhere is going to happen. It happens every year. I always see it happen, and this year it's going to be huge, and nobody's going to come. Now, maybe that's like, I don't even know, the Patriots trading for, like, Brandon Ayuk or some crazy shit that you would never even see coming. Now, that one won't happen, but you get my point. Someone who's big is going to get traded to a team that you would never have considered them, saying, why would they spend all that money and cash and draft picks and players to get that person? So those are my real predictions. Now, that'll wrap it up for the NFL free agency preview. I hope you enjoyed this. Now, next week, we're going to do a kind of March Madness preview. I don't really know how the March Madness preview is going to work because there's so many teams, and I don't know if I'm going to just kind of pick a couple of teams to look at or a couple of matchups in the first round. I haven't really decided how that March Madness preview is going to work, but next week episode on March 17th is going to be March Madness. That's the episode, and we'll kind of play it from there. So I want to thank everyone on YouTube for tuning in. You had to clearly find me because there's like 7 of you who actually watch, and I thank you. Please subscribe, hit the like button, comment, hit the bell, do all the things, because it helps with the channel, and I appreciate it for you dedicating your significant amount of time listening to me ramble and ramble. For those of you listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everywhere else that you can listen to podcasts, thank you. Consider leaving a review if you can, or whatever. I really appreciate you finding me and listening to me, because I know there are 10 billion other things you could be doing, and instead you're listening to me. So thank you all so much for that. I really, really appreciate it. My name is H. James K. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.